Hello, everyone, and welcome to the third episode of 3 on the Dubai series. I'm excited to bring the story home, close it out. We've been through a lot. We've seen Dubai go from a sleepy village in the middle of the desert, the Bedouin, the Hadar. We've seen the attempts to become an entreport, the challenges to those attempts, the difficult years before World War II, the outrageous vision that Rashid brought as he became Sheik, and of course, perhaps the part of the story that almost everybody expects, the discovery of oil. But now we know that oil wasn't the most important element in the story, and I think we can argue that successfully. But it played a role nonetheless. In this episode, we're going to pick up our story and see how Rashid actually used oil, how Dubai overcame oil dependence, and how the seeds blossom into the modern Dubai. And of course, we are going to see some of those quirks that Dubai is known for today, some of the criticisms it gets, and try to understand them and put them into context, not just of what Dubai is today, but the history that we have seen up to this point. Those belief systems that were molded in the hot summers in the desert, and how those belief systems have adapted to a global metropolis. So let's jump right into part 7, the post-oil world. Part 7, the post-oil world. Travel no longer just happens on camels. There's cars, and of course, Dubai, after 1972, is going to have a world-class airport. It's going to have a world-class airline, an Emirates Airline. And the people who just 50 years earlier had to gather at some kind of oasis before they made the next journey now can simply gather at a lounge in an airport with air conditioning and whatever you want to eat while they wait for the next flight to really anywhere in the world. Discovering oil means that your income will become dependent on oil very quickly. Now, Dubai, perhaps more than other countries, was aware of the dangers of being dependent on just one single product. They had seen the story before, and the pearl business did not go well. By 1975, oil earnings dominated Dubai's economy, bringing in nearly 2/3 of GDP. But that year also stood as the peak of oil's importance for Dubai. By 1985, oil's contribution had slipped to 50% of GDP. By 1995, it was down to 18%. By 2000, it slid to 10%. And in 2006, oil sales brought a minuscule 3% of Dubai's overall economy. Within a lifetime, Dubai moved from oil dependence to independence, becoming most likely the first post-oil economy in the Middle East. And this is really quite remarkable. We saw how, within just 9 years, from 1966 to 1975, oil became 2/3 of GDP. So you can imagine that for other countries that had not spent nearly as much time trying to diversify their port business, their industries, oil likely became 80, 90% of income, and it sort of stayed there very high. And for other countries that became dependent on oil, the swings in oil price in the market would mean catastrophic changes. A 10% drop in oil price means a 10% drop in your country's budget, which is a big issue. But Dubai was able to ride the wave of oil. They didn't have that much, so in a way, they were sort of expected that their oil will one day run out much sooner than Abu Dhabi or Saudi Arabia or Kuwait. But nonetheless, they were able to parlay that oil wealth into a highly diversified economy and achieve a place where whatever happens to oil in the next 100 years, it would likely not matter very much to Dubai. That's pretty good, for a town that wasn't fully electrified until the 1960s. And Dubai has likely undergone perhaps the fastest rise to wealth from underdevelopment to development in the history of the world. Now, it's common to try to take lessons here and say, what can other countries do? But the reality is that Dubai really leveraged its unique characteristics as best as it could. It had a small native population. It had proximity to oil, their oil, and of course, other countries' oil, which, remember, was important during those loans and gifts before they discovered their own oil. Their tribal rulers were enlightened, and they were willing to give out the money back into the people. And they were willing to use the money to build infrastructure for the people. That model likely wouldn't apply anywhere else. It would not apply in Iraq, which also has oil. It will not apply in Egypt, who doesn't have oil. Many states will not be able to accept such a large number of foreigners like Dubai has. And what's intriguing is for countries today that might be thinking about how to move away from oil, Dubai has a first mover advantage in many sectors. You want to build the most important port in the Middle East? Dubai already has that. You want to build a world-class airline? Dubai has that already. You could likely compete, but Dubai already has it. You want to build some global financial system? Dubai has it. You want to build a hub for knowledge work, let's say for internet companies? Dubai has it. So it's intriguing that by Dubai seeking out so many different ways to diversify, they took key roles in industries that now other countries are trying to figure out how do we actually not only compete with Dubai, but how do we diversify away from oil in a way that perhaps we find gaps that a city like Dubai has not optimized for yet. As Dubai became modernized, they also started to look for ways to project power globally. So it wasn't just enough to say, let's have this huge port and all the common modern signals, electricity, roads. Let's see if we can build a brand that's recognizable in the Middle East initially, but then globally. And perhaps one of the best icons that has achieved this would be the Emirates Airlines that was founded in 1985. It started with just 2 charter jets and quickly grew into a full-fledged international airline with hundreds of jet aircrafts. What's intriguing about the Emirates is when it was created, the Dubai ruling family debated the name of it. And they thought that perhaps they could call it Dubai Airlines to signify that it comes from Dubai. Or they could call it the Emirates Airlines as a way to promote the UAE itself. And they ended up doing Emirates Airlines. Some people might say it's a mistake, but I think it might be a way for them to contribute back into the UAE, which Dubai belongs to. And despite its success, it's still tied to its other members and maintaining those relationships, in particular with Abu Dhabi, again, the sort of senior partner in the UAE, made sense. But nonetheless, the Emirates Airlines, once you become a little familiar with it, you eventually find out that this is kind of, this is a Dubai thing, even if it doesn't really fully carry their name. The airline did provide many benefits to Dubai. It's really been indispensable to a city that depends completely on air travel. The ability to bring people in, bring people out, the push into tourism that we're going to see Dubai go into once it sort of goes through its standard development industries like ports, electricity. These were all things that were made possible by having an airline. So another thing that seemed perhaps kind of crazy initially, 1985 was, again, 30, 40 years from when the first cars arrived in Dubai. The airline became an essential part in what it meant to be a global brand, a global city that people can arrive to from wherever they are in the world. The airline is also a good example of what it means to be successful without taxes. Now, we're going to see taxes in the final section here, but the Dubai government has sort of made a name on having low taxes. In fact, having no income taxes, no property taxes. They do have corporate taxes, and they have, of course, custom duty fees in some things. But projects like the airlines meant that they could run this state-owned business. They could take the profits and then use it to fund back the government. And of course, Dubai government has many of these types of things. But the airline is another example of here's a state that's actually really good at running a business, a profitable business, and a business that can compete globally. And I think it just simply reinforces the competency for the people who live in Dubai and, of course, the people who live in the UAE in general, that here's a government that is quite capable of not just simply handing out money, but actually competing with the big players, with the Deltas and the Ryanairs and so forth. Now, we're getting here towards the end of Sheik Rashid's rule. Now, in 1985, There were some projections that Dubai's population would reach 500,000 people by 2005, but those projections were wildly off. The city actually reached 500,000 individuals by 1990, 15 years earlier than predicted. And this rapid growth meant there were growing pains. There was an Egyptian urban planner that arrived in Dubai in 1993 to help with some of the development. And he was just flabbergasted that Dubai just, had no database of land ownership, no zoning laws, no planning standards, no building regulations. So these were the things that Dubai had to add. They were sort of building things primarily perhaps on what Sheik Rashid wanted and what he believed was best, but there was still no structure, and the city had to put the structure quickly. You're talking about hundreds of thousands of people that are being added in a very short amount of time. How can you then rejig the entire system to make that work? In 1990, Sheik Rashid is going to pass away, and his son, Mohammed, is going to take over. He's the current ruler of Dubai. It was a tricky time. The Dubai economy was experiencing some difficulties, primarily actually to the impending Persian Gulf War. This is when Iraq will invade Kuwait. But like a lot of things in Dubai's history, the war ended up being a positive thing for Dubai. It caused some initial uncertainty as Dubai was making a big push into tourism. But Dubai ended up being a strategic location as a trade hub, as it was somewhat separate from the war zone itself. And it allowed Dubai to recover much quicker than neighbors and became a safe haven for businesses that were fleeing the instability of neighboring countries. So once again, Dubai happened to find a way to leverage what was a difficult event into one that then will allow Dubai to keep on growing. And the oil boom in the 1970s allowed Dubai to become very rich and sort of fast track a lot of these projects. But then there's going to be a post-2001 oil boom that will allow Dubai to become even more rich, to grow at an even more mind-boggling pace, and to make itself known. I think Dubai post-2000 is going to become a truly global brand. It's going to open real estate, and it's going to do a bunch of other things to solidify that presence in the world. The 1990 war will also establish Dubai as a key player in regional politics. It will align with Western powers, and it will help establish diplomatic ties between other countries within the region itself. So again, Dubai now takes its focus perhaps just internal during this rule of Sheik Rashid and starts to become more external as he passes the power to his son, and Dubai will keep on growing under a new ruler. We're coming to the end of the story here. In the last part, we're going to look at how many of the seeds that were planted during this era, the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, and the 80s, are going to blossom into sometimes unusual quirks in Dubai society today. And of course, how they have blossomed into even more success as Dubai goes on into the 21st century. Part 8. The Modern Economy. What you hear is the Dubai Metro. This was the first rapid transit train network in the Arabian Peninsula. It began operations in 2009. It actually runs underground in the city center, and the trains are fully automated and driverless. As you can imagine, of course, all the trains and train stations are temperature controlled. And from 2009 to 2006, Dubai Metro was the world's longest driverless metro network, with a route length of about 75 kilometers. The system was actually surpassed by the Vancouver SkyTrain, where I live, in 2006 for the longest fully automated system in the world, but then regained the title in 2021 until December 2024 when it was surpassed by the opening of the metro system in Saudi Arabia. In this final part, I just want to talk about some of the quirky things that now we can see in Dubai. And because of the story we have done, I think we can start to see how it might connect back into some of the decisions that were made back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, in particular under Sheik Rashid's rule. We'll start with the political system. As we know, this is an autocratic rule, because there's a single ruler, in this case, Sheikh Mohammed, in Dubai's case. He holds unlimited power. It's tribal because the rule is based on one tribe and one family, and the power is typically handed down through generations. Now, Sheikh Mohammed has written about the political system, and he argues that democracy, from his perspective, is the right to choose, and that for people who live in Dubai are choosing to be there. And if you come in as an expat, which is a major portion of the population, you have made a choice to come into Dubai. Now, when you're there, you might not have choice in how the government is run. You might have a little bit more influence if you are a citizen, but you're still making a choice to remain in Dubai. So for them, it's not so much about having the freedom to count votes or to have protests, but simply making a choice with your feet, so to speak. It's an intriguing concept, especially, I think if one grows up in the West and we're very accustomed to democracy and, political freedom means that you get to choose your rulers. In a way, right, the Emirati citizens and, of course, the expats do not get to choose the rulers, but they do get prosperity. So one has to argue, is democracy a way to get prosperity? So if you have prosperity, do you need democracy? Maybe there's no easy answers. But I have seen that many of the criticisms aim at Dubai, especially in this area, typically come down to people cannot vote, people cannot protest, the press is not 100% free, there is privacy spying, and I'm sure if you are in Dubai and you find yourself organizing meetups around uprising towards the government, it's likely the police will find you and deport you. I think this is all pretty realistic. But I think this criticism, again, comes from a Western perspective that prosperity does not come without democracy, but that's not quite the way that has happened in Dubai. The political structure has been relatively stable. The Al Maktoum family has been in charge since 1833. There was that period in the 1930s where there was a potential uprising that failed. But other than that, power has been passed on multiple times through the same family. So we are talking about, maybe 175 years of uninterrupted succession. Not bad. And of course, this model is not unique to Dubai. It's the same model in the rest of the UAE. It's the same model in Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, Oman. It's the same tribal families that have been in power for a long time, different lengths depending on where you're looking at. And the UAE in particular has enjoyed perhaps the greatest stability in the region despite offering the fewest political freedoms. Some of the other Gulf countries have other freedoms that do offer, maybe form of elections or some, forms of democracy. We also have to keep in mind that the political calculus varies depending on how many people you're talking about. The UAE has about 1 million citizens. This is very different from the expats, which we're going to see in a second. And the oil revenue that comes in the UAE, primarily to Abu Dhabi, is quite large. In 2007, for example, there were about $71 billion in oil revenue. And it's enough to dole out about $55,000 a year in subsidies to the average male Emirati citizen. Other countries, like Saudi Arabia, have a higher number of citizens. And even if they have more oil revenue, the numbers are just a little trickier. So this is just to say that every country sort of has to find their own mix of strengths and weaknesses and then try to form their own success. And regardless of what one might think led to success in Dubai, it may not fully transfer over. I mean, you think someone like Iran that discovered oil much earlier, in 1908, has a similar society. And, it's Muslim, there's similar structures, and the outcome has just not been the same. But for Dubai and the UAE, it has worked quite well, we can say. There's issues, which we're going to see here in a second, but the country is stable and there's a high level of prosperity here. Dubai has also provided freedoms in other areas. Despite being Muslim, you do have some things that are a little bit different. Women are encouraged to work. There's little separation of women and men compared to what you might see in another country, like Bahrain. Alcohol is available, and again, with such a large foreign population, some of those things may just be completely not practical, but nonetheless, they progress. And there's a large promotion of entrepreneurship and scholarship and general intellectual thought, right? So from a political structure, freedom here just simply means freedom to do business and to engage in consumer consumption, of products and events, and not so much an aspect of political freedom. And Dubai would say, I think the argument will argue that if you are willing to come to Dubai and you're willing to work, then you're welcome. But if you're not willing to work, if you're not willing to do your part to contribute back to the country in some way, economically primarily is what we're talking about here, then Dubai is likely not the right fit for you. And I do think the majority of the people who arrive in Dubai are of that mindset. This is a place to build a career, to make money, and you might not be here for a long time because there's going to be some issues, especially if you're an expat. But from the economic perspective, this is a good place to be, especially compared to perhaps some of the alternatives in the regions or some of the countries where people might be coming from. Now, let's talk about the citizens, because this is perhaps the biggest split in Dubai today. So the citizens, also called nationals, these are the Emirati citizens, they make up a small portion of the UAE population. In total, it's about 10%. In places like Dubai, the number might be about 3%, 4%. But you got to think about these numbers, right? You walk into a room with 100 people, about 10 will be citizens. And in somewhere like Dubai, that number might be 3. So if you arrive in Dubai as a foreigner, your odds of meeting, let alone befriending a citizen, a national, is actually pretty low. Now, citizens do get several benefits that expats do not. So we can say that, a lot of that oil revenue and just prosperity does flow into citizens much more than just the expats. So here are some of the benefits that citizens get. There's free schools within the union, as expected, but the free schooling actually goes up to a PhD level anywhere in the world. So if you want to go to university outside of the UAE, in the US, Britain, Europe, the government will pay for that. There are free plots of land, interest-free loans to build a house. There are payments to nationals to marry other nationals. Again, this is actually something the government encourages. They much prefer nationals to marry other nationals. And if you do, then you're actually going to get a certain amount of cash from the government. The government provides jobs to nationals. And it is said that many of these jobs do not require a lot of work or effort, and could be argued that they're actually a form of welfare. The sort of easy jobs that pay you a high enough salary. The government also provides nationals the opportunity to collect rent as landlords and as what's called sort of paper business partners. So if you're a foreign business, you need a local national as a partner. So nationals can fulfill the role of a partner. You might not actually provide anything to the business besides being a national, and you can then get a portion of the revenue of the profits just by being a national. If you're a national with low income, the government will provide even more subsidized housing. So the Dubai government has actually built affordable houses, and those houses are then given to low-income nationals. These houses are actually valued at around $500,000 US, and the average plot of land is around 9,000 square meters. Many of these houses are actually so big enough that they actually have a servant's room. And if you're a national who cannot work, who cannot take one of those government jobs, there is, of course, generous charity to widows and divorcees, orphans, disabled people, families of prisoners, and the aid seems to start at about $1,500 US per month, depending on the number of family members. And it is estimated that, again, the nationals do receive perhaps about $55,000 a year in just straight up cash distributions. So if you're a national, if you're a citizen, you are really quite well off, right? There's not a lot of need to pay for basic necessities. There's jobs that are provided. There's other benefits. So this is something that's going to be quite stark compared to the expats. But again, from a national perspective, from a citizen perspective, this is a highly prosperous country. A lot of the oil wealth, let's say in Abu Dhabi, and just economic wealth in Dubai does flow into the nationals' pockets. This is also that unspoken bargain that takes place between the tribal ruler, the sheik, and the citizens, where the citizens don't have the political freedom, but they get prosperity, and of course they get a lot of very tangible forms of prosperity given to them on an annual basis. So you will not feel like you're poor, and even if you're a low-income national, you're going to get even more subsidies. So the support of a tribal ruler is primarily linked to the nationals themselves, to the citizens, And this is a very sort of direct relationship to say, you are receiving direct benefits from our governments, and thus you support us and you support the ruling family. Now, of course, 10% is a very small percentage of the population. So the other 90% are the expats. Now, migrant workers have really formed the majority of the UAE population since the 1960s. That influx of oil wealth and just the large development that took place in Dubai really starts creating incentives for the citizens, the nationals, to move into high pay, relatively low effort type of government jobs, while allowing migrants and expats to take on the rest of the work. And if you compare, let's say, a high paying government job compared to, let's say, a construction worker, we of course can see a very stark difference in terms of effort, especially if you're trying to do construction in the middle of the Dubai summers. Now, the split in Dubai is more extreme, right? About 95% of the population are expats. And it's really quite varied. There's an estimate that there's about 200 different countries represented in Dubai. And if you take about, let's say, 2 million inhabitants in the city, there's maybe around 100,000 citizens among them. And the rest are expats of different countries. And we do have to acknowledge here that depending on what country you come from, there's a likely probability of a certain type of job. So for migrants who are coming from India, there's a really high probability that they're working a construction job, which is some of the lowest paid jobs in Dubai. If you're coming from Britain, it is likely you're working some knowledge work job, which pays well in comparison. And of course, it's much more comfortable, less physically intense. The expat system is also tied to jobs. That is, when you get a visa to come to work in Dubai, it might be typically for a 3-year term, and that visa is tied to your job. So if you lose your job or you quit your job, then your visa is susceptible to be revoked and for you to be deported. The deportations seem to be common enough that this is a legitimate fear. So once your 3-year term ends, then you have to renew the visa. And again, you're sort of tied to whatever job you're doing. There's lots of reasons why people get deported besides losing a job. Any kind of crime, any kind of obstruction that the government does not like can lead to a deportation. What's intriguing about this is like the Dubai government doesn't actually seem to see deportations as final. There are cases where someone perhaps commits a crime, they get deported, they get a 6-month ban from returning to Dubai, but then after those 6 months, they can come back and reapply for a job. It's perhaps, again, another outcome of a system that sees, hey, as long as you're willing to work, you're willing to contribute, you're welcome. If you do something wrong, we'll give you a bit of a punishment, but this is not a ban for the rest of your life. It's just a reminder that, you have to sort of follow the system here. Let's not get too creative outside of the system. Come here, do your job, live your life, and don't go too crazy. Which is a little tricky, because you hear some stories when the weekend comes in Dubai, which in the Middle East, the weekend actually starts Friday and Saturday instead of a Saturday Sunday that we may be accustomed here. So people typically work a Sunday to Thursday schedule. So the Friday and Saturdays can get quite rowdy in some places in Dubai. There's alcohol, there's drugs, there's a foreign-born population that doesn't identify with the principles of Islam. So there are elements of Dubai that can be quite Hellenistic. And it's one of the criticisms that Dubai gets from, let's say, other Arab nations, that they allow all these foreigners, Christians and Jews and anything else, and they're just out there, doing drugs and getting drunk in the cities and the bars and so on. So the culture does allow for that. People are not just simply working, going home and doing nothing. But there are definitely things that if you do them, your visa gets terminated and you get deported. This kind of visa program tied to jobs is not novel. The US, of course, has a similar system with the H-1 visa, where for primarily IT professionals, you come in and your visa is tied to your employer, and you may be susceptible to similar things, though they're not quite as extreme. But if you do lose your job, then you're sometimes forced to leave. Now, after the period in the US, typically about 6 years, I believe, for the H-1 visa, you can apply for a permanent residency, but there's no guarantee you receive it. But I think the probabilities are actually higher to get in the US than in Dubai. In Dubai, the citizenship process is quite difficult. And it's clearly been designed to be a very rare occurrence if you're not a descendant of, existent nationals. The nationality is passed down the male bloodline from Emirati man to the children. If an Emirati woman marries a foreign husband, even a man from her own tribe who happens to be a citizen of, let's say, Oman, neither the husband nor the couple's children will receive UAE citizenship. Now, from the time of independence in 1971 to 1997, about 50,000 people were naturalized. And since then, it's been almost a de facto policy in the UAE that the number of new citizens should be drastically reduced. Also, when you become a citizen, doesn't actually mean you become a national. Nationals typically have special cards, and citizens are not actually entitled to all the benefits I mentioned earlier. There's another process to become a national. Nonetheless, even to become a citizen, the requirements are difficult. Here's what they are. So you need to have 30 years of residence in a city in the UAE, let's say Dubai. You need to be a Muslim, you need to be an Arab, and you need to be an Arab speaker, and you need to have a clean police record, proper academic qualifications. I'm actually not quite sure what this is, but I imagine this must be like a university level qualification, and a healthy bank balance. Again, I don't see specifics here, but there's probably some general numbers here. And of course, it's up to the government's discretion to sort of apply some of these levels. Now, even if you have all this, and for many people, they may have been in Dubai for 30, 40, 50 years, and they may be Muslim and Arab and be an Arabic speaker and actually speak Arabic with the specific accent of the region. Even if you have all that, then there's another level of requirement that's typically referred to as wasta, which is influence. It sort of comes down to who you know. And there's examples of people who have all the requirements above, and they have wasta. They know someone who's perhaps a high-level government official. Even then, it might take years to kind of get that citizenship provided. This means that for that 90% of expats in the UAE, and again, 95 in Dubai, their chance of legal permanence in Dubai is really quite non-existent. Whether you stay a week or 40 years, you're eventually going to have to leave. There's also an intriguing quirk here that since the visa is tied to your employment, if you were to retire, let's say at 65, as sort of like the standard age here in the West, then you actually cannot stay in Dubai after that because you no longer have a job. So for many expats, their stay in Dubai is by design temporary. It might be 20, 30, 40, 50 years, but at some point, likely in your 60s, you're going to have to leave Dubai. So this might affect, of course, how you think about your decisions. You might not settle down. You maybe have kids, but keep a citizenship somewhere else, that kind of stuff. So this is what many of the expats are thinking about. There's a criticism here, of course, that means that many expats are constantly worried about losing their visa, or they cannot do long-term planning. And I think those are all valid concerns. But again, generally, this system has been established to maintain a direct relationship with the nationals and with the citizens who do qualify those specific requirements. And for the expats themselves, they are welcome. They're here, they're able to take part of the prosperity in Dubai and have jobs, but they're not welcoming enough to stay here forever and to sort of establish some kind of lineage of family that's going to span multiple generations. That's not the kind of welcome that Dubai is offering for expats. Within the nationals population, there are also kind of interesting quirks. Because there's so much money flowing to nationals and to some extent citizens, then there's actually high levels of unemployment within this group. There's typically not a long drive to take on difficult jobs. There's actually, throughout the years, the Dubai and the UAE government has made pushes to try to get nationals into private jobs that are not government provided. And it just has not worked very well, perhaps outside like banking. So something like 99% of the nationals who do work, they work in government jobs, which means that when it comes from an entrepreneurship perspective, from a private job perspective, those are primarily being done by expats. Now, the government, of course, has a big role in the economy here through businesses like the Emirates Airlines, but it's just been one of the struggles that the UAE admits exists with its nationals population, that they don't seem to be as motivated as some of the immigrants and expats who come into the economy from other countries. It's also worthwhile to know that, the construction industry in particular has received a lot of criticism. Some of the conditions for the workers who come in from, let's say, countries like India, who are taking some of the lowest paying jobs in Dubai, though we'd also have to note that those low paying jobs in Dubai typically pay more than what might be available in India, which is why sort of people come into Dubai. But the conditions in the housing camps are not luxurious. It's not what you might expect in Dubai. There's been deaths in construction zones. For example, in 2007, about 800 workers fell to their deaths in the UAE, which is about twice as many in the United States, despite, of course, the US being a significantly larger population. And falls are actually the city's chief on-the-job killer. This is despite actually many of the victims wearing safety harnesses. So again, some of the quirks here of unstoppable growth also means that at an individual level for a construction company, some of the regulations that the government might try to pass aren't fully followed through. Some of these expats or migrant workers lose their passports when they come in and take a job, and they're not able to leave Dubai. They may have debts to pay. Intriguingly, there's a quirk I saw that if you want to rent an apartment in Dubai, you have to pay 12 months of rent in advance, which means that for many people, they actually have to get a loan to pay their rent. And loans are easily accessible. That's not the issue. But then the issue becomes that because loans are so easily accessible, many people might end up taking loans that they cannot afford. And in Dubai, about 40% of the prisoners are actually there because of debt. Again, just another quirk of what's a lot of wealth that's available, but some of the ways in the system works are a little funny. Now, economic success in Dubai is, of course, the thing that Dubai is perhaps known for. There's no income or property tax. There's been a recent introduction of corporate taxes, which hasn't been there forever. And right now there's talks about 10 to 20% corporate tax, primarily on foreign companies. There are some industries that are exempt. Of course, state-run companies are exempt altogether. But the tax base of Dubai is small. There's hotel occupancy tax. There's some levies on restaurant meals, liquor sales. There's some duty taxes, fees for permits, road tolls. But the government's budget also comes from the profits of the businesses they run, like Emirates Airlines or the aluminum companies and other industries. So intriguingly, Dubai argues that, if you live in a country where you sort of need help to process your taxes, like, here in Canada or US, it kind of means that perhaps your tax system is kind of too complex. Why can you have a world where you have no income tax, no property tax, and perhaps just put taxes on the business themselves and get profit somewhere else? It's kind of like, it's an intriguing idea. I don't know how well it will work in all economies, but this is, again, one of the pitches. And if you're a knowledge worker who's coming from Britain into Dubai, you cannot be there forever. You cannot be there for more than some limited amount of years, but you're not going to pay income tax. You're not going to pay property tax. You're going to get paid relatively well, comparable to other places in the world. So that can be very attractive, right? And this is just a trade-off that many people will do to get access to some of this prosperity that Dubai has. Now, Dubai has sort of built himself up in so many industries. I can't really list them all. It's intriguing. In 2007, actually, Dubai was the 5th largest overall diamond center and a number 4 handler of rough diamonds. And they were quickly catching up to Mumbai, which is number 2 at the time, and Tel Aviv, which is number 3, and then Antwerp, which is number 1. So it's almost like, you take a random industry and Dubai may actually have a significant stake in it. Tourism, of course, became very big from the 90s onwards. Dubai now welcomes more than 6 million tourists a year. And they actually raised that figure to about 15 million by 2010 and onwards. And Dubai has sort of built intriguing sort of tourist destinations, there's huge buildings, the beach, and all this just attraction of the city. So you can imagine that, again, 100 years ago, like, would you say Dubai is like a tourism destination? Probably not. Like, you're going to go to the desert, but now they did. So they sort of take crazy ideas and then just make them happen. And it doesn't happen overnight, but it also happens pretty quickly. In a matter of years, this entire sort of sector of industry just arises out of nothing and becomes a significant player in the space. The world's best horses are trained in Dubai. They actually fly them to Europe to take part in races and then fly them back home to the training base in Dubai. There's internet companies that have based themselves out of Dubai. Of course, from a military perspective, there's sort of military providers that are based in Dubai. So all these things, Joseph Rose, and of course, we have to mention the buildings themselves, the Burj Khalifa and others that are just iconic. And when you think about crazy, well-known buildings, there are several that are in Dubai. I'm actually going to put a link in the bonus content for the scene in Mission Impossible where Tom Cruise actually climbs the Burj Khalifa from the outside. I think you should definitely watch it. Mission Impossible is one of my favorite movies. So, when Tom Cruise wanted to make this crazy stunt and started, climbing like the tallest building, Dubai was just like a perfect fit. I'm sure like when Dubai heard this, it was like, oh, you want to make this like never seen stunt in a movie in the tallest building ever at the time. Of course, we'll do it. It's just such a perfect fit for how Dubai sort of thinks of itself. And of course, Dubai and the UAE in general is now one of the Middle East's most important internet, technology, media hubs, and just quickly adapting to whatever new technologies are coming up. Now, some final quirks. Dubai has to import a lot of things. You remember even just 100 years ago, they had palm trees, they had dates, they had camels. In a way, there's a lot of things that have to be imported just because they're not really grown here. The consumption in the UAE is quite high, let's say, of water. This is, I think, a consequence of what it means to have free things. Electricity is heavily subsidized, water is heavily subsidized. So there's been some weird ways in which buildings have been constructed where perhaps they're not constructed in a way to minimize electricity usage or minimize how much air conditioning you might need because of the heat. Because again, there was so much money that you don't have to worry about it. You just buy more electricity. But now as time goes on, Dubai is having to rethink some of its assumptions, say, maybe we need some regulations when we construct buildings because we don't want to just have skyrocketing energy usage. We want to become more energy efficient as we go forward. But even then, once sort of Dubai kind of thinks about this, then they just make this big state-led push. The Dubai Sustainable Tourism stamp was actually awarded to about 70 hotels who were now starting to meet sustainability requirements and more eco-friendly practices. Car crashes are also an intriguing quirk of the Dubai culture, where it seems like on average, a car crash happens every 2 minutes, and the rate of fatalities is among the world's highest. Each day, about 3 people die in UAE traffic wrecks. 2 of them are killed by reckless drivers. And crashes are responsible for about 15% of all the deaths in Dubai and the rest of the Gulf region. The biggest killer after heart disease. In the UAE, more Emirati men are killed in road accidents than by any other cause. It's not quite clear. There's a lot of reasons that are put forth. Perhaps the society that frowns on dating and drinking alcohol, then there might be other ways to seek arousal, and perhaps Emirati men in particular find it in driving really fast. There's, of course, a huge availability of big cars like 4x4s and trucks, which again, from the perspective of perhaps people who live in Dubai and of course the nationals, is not an issue to just buy whatever the biggest car you want. Emiratis themselves do make up about 60% of those hospitalized, and more than 75% of those people who are hospitalized are male. Car crashes also introduce us to the idea of wasta, again, influence, where if you're in a car crash and you happen to have some wasta, let's say you're a national and you know someone at the government level, maybe the car crash happens in a slightly different way from the way it did. Maybe a light wasn't actually red, it was green. Maybe the other person made a mistake. So there are these quirks in the system where you might get some advantages if you are of a specific group. And again, if you're a national in particular, you can expect a lot of advantages, not just those benefits we mentioned above, but some advantages if you happen to find yourself in some kind of legal issue or some kind of issue where it's you versus an expat. Climate is also changing in Dubai. In actually April 2024, there was some flooding that took place in Dubai as there was more rain than expected. This is not to say that somehow the dry desert climate is going to change overnight, but Dubai is now forced to rethink and say, we might actually get more rain going forward. We need to perhaps rebuild parts of our city to deal with it. That being said, Dubai has clearly shown its neighbors, the rest of the UAE, and of course the other Arab nations, that political stability comes from having a solid economy and a government that serves its people for the majority of the time, rather than the other way around. There's really not a big obsession here with politics, which I think you see in other countries. Some other Arab nations, for example, like Egypt or even Iran, where there's a big obsession with politics. You don't really hear these conversations in Dubai. Mohammed, in his book, The Current Ruler of Dubai, always talks about that there's a race going on, and that Dubai is racing not just other nations, but they're racing themselves, and they're in a race to improve themselves, to find new industries before the existing industries become obsolete, to modernize the economy, to adopt new technologies. So I think this is a belief that I think we see all the way from Sheik Rashid, and of course his son follows it through, where yes, Dubai is successful today. Yes, it has crazy things, but what about the future? What are the technologies of the future, and how can Dubai get into them? There's an intriguing analogy I found during the research where Dubai was seen as the Cordoba when Spain was ruled by the Arabs. This is back in the 10th century. And the analogy is kind of intriguing for Dubai, and even for the rest of UAE to an extent, where Cordoba under the Muslims, flourished as one of the most advanced cities in Europe under Islam rule. At its peak in the 10th century, Cordoba may have had about maybe 300 to 500,000 inhabitants. It had paved streets, street lights, public baths, a sophisticated water supply. Its libraries were unparalleled in Europe at the time. Scholars from all over the world, whether they were Christian or Jewish or, of course, Islamic, they would come in to study medicine and astronomy and philosophy. And Cordoba became a bit of a bridge between multiple cultures that may have been at odds for many times, primarily the Islamic, Jewish, and Christian scholars. But it was a hub of enlightenment that was, in some ways, quite stark to perhaps what was going on in other parts of the world. Dubai may not fully match this. I don't know if we can say that Dubai is completely an intellectual hub, but it is clearly a hub where many ideas can flourish and people are welcome within constraints, of course. You're not allowed to do anything, but from an economic perspective and building business, I do think there's quite a bit of freedom here. As we finish here, there's a line from one of the primary books here during the research called The City of Gold by Jim Crane that I think does encompass Dubai quite well, and especially if we think about the future of Dubai. He says, quote, "Dubai's accomplishments are difficult to believe, even as you watch them materialize. It's a place that mercilessly taunts the pessimist." My final point here is, on February 9, 2021, the UAE government became the first Arab country and the fifth country overall to reach Mars with a probe. And they were the second country to successfully enter Mars's orbit on its first try, the first one being India. And the probe that the UAE sent then took pictures, and those pictures have been used in a lot of different ways since then. And it's, to me, such an intriguing final point here that now you have a government that is no longer just modernizing itself and going into different industries, but now is going into space and building space technology to go into Mars. And I imagine, what would happen if you were to go back, really one generation, like generation and a half, we're talking about like 100 years, 120 years, and you found yourself in the middle of the desert with one of the Bedouin that we saw at the beginning of our story here. And you're telling him that one day his people are going to build structures taller than anything else in the world, taller than even the pyramids in Egypt. They're going to find a way to control climate in any way you want to. Have all the food you ever want, all the water, of course, you can ever want. A way to move yourself faster and more reliable than camels. And not only that, one day you'll build ships, not with people, but ships in general that can actually fly into the stars and go beyond the stars into other planets. Who knows how, the Bedouin might respond to this? It's so outrageous, right? He might just simply look back up to that starry sky, look back at you and simply say, Inshallah, if God wills it. And that is all. That is the third episode out of 3 on the Dubai series. I hope you have enjoyed this 3-part, 3-week release on Dubai. My name is Ruben Ugarte. I gotta tell you, this has been one of my favorite episodes. I think I mentioned at the very beginning, episode 1, that I'm stretching the definition of an organization to encompass governments. And I think this is just a worthy story of that stretching. Now, if you enjoyed these 3 episodes, I would highly appreciate if you take 60 seconds and post a review, what you think of the podcast. You can do this in the Apple Store or Spotify or wherever you listen to a podcast. They might have their own comment systems. I think that would really help the podcast grow. And of course, it'll help other people discover the podcast. There is one more post that will go out containing the bonus content, some of the links, videos that I think add further context to this entire story. You can check that out on the website itself. That is stratagems.ca. That will be released next week. And if you're a subscriber, you will receive it to your email. Otherwise, you can just circle back in a week or so and look for that bonus content. I think there's a few clips in particular that I think you'll find enjoyable. I gotta point out again that Mission Impossible clip, highly worth watching that to see the Burj Khalifa in a bit of a movie context. After the bonus content, there will be a bit of a break as I get ready for the next episode. And then we will be back again with a multi-episode series on a new topic, on the new organization, and the strategies they use to shape the modern world. Until next time, my name is Ruben. We'll talk soon.